I recorded today's episode around noon yesterday, on Monday, just before all of the fantasy football headlines shifted the fantasy football landscape. I recorded and submitted that episode just before we learned where Saquon Barkley was going, or DeAndre Swift, or Tony Pollard, or Josh Jacobs, or Austin Eckler, or Kirk Cousins, none of which are in this upcoming episode of Inside the 20 by Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. Now, that said, I did cover those free agent signings on the shorts that are on the Basement Brewed Fantasy Football YouTube page, as well as on my TikTok, which is at BBFF Mikey. And that's not to say this episode that's coming up is useless, because it's definitely not. We talk about a lot of really good things, from Russell Wilson to joining the Steelers, Jeudy joining the Browns, lots and lots of really good fantasy football insight that's coming up on episode 6 of Inside the 20, which begins right now. What is up, my friend? Welcome in, welcome back. This is episode 6 of Inside the 20 by Basement Brewed Fantasy Football, where we have over 300 plus fantasy football players that are outsmarting their friends and dominating their leagues using our insights, our resources, and our amazing online community. I'm your host. I am Mikey Henninger, and I am insanely excited about this episode. Guys, I'm more excited about this episode than I have been in any of the previous 5 episodes of Inside the 20, and I was really excited about those. My excitement is because we are about to dig into NFL free agency, and literally every single time I look at my phone, there's another new fantasy football relevant name that is changing their uniform. So we're going to dig into some of what those look like. Candidly, this one is not going to be less than 20 minutes. It's not even going to be less than 30 minutes. We'll be under 40, but it's not going to be less than 30 minutes because there is a lot to catch up on, and frankly, there's a lot more to come. So it's a good time for you to press pause and click that subscribe button on the YouTube channel, because there are going to be shorts coming as free agency dominoes continue to drop. We're going to be talking more NFL free agency on Friday. I am going to be interviewing another former NFL ball player who, hint, hint, is a part of one of the most famous plays in NFL history. We're going to be talking NFL draft. We're going to be talking rookie content, including I'm going to be bringing on another guest who's an absolute guru when it comes to evaluating incoming rookies. And of course, I'm about halfway finished with my 2024 Fantasy Draft Guide, which is a resource that my subscribers use to dominate their friends before the first football is even kicked. And once that's done, we're going to be talking best ball content. And of course, when I say done, the Fantasy Draft Guide is never done. I update it all summer long leading up to the first kickoff in September. So again, great time for you to press pause, hit subscribe, because there is a lot of stuff coming up that you're just not going to want to miss. Real quick housekeeping before we dive into the great stuff. Housekeeping! Just a quick reminder that Basement Brewed Fantasy Football bakes early bird pricing into our subscription packages at basementbrewedff.com. So if you're planning at any point to join us, if you're planning on joining basementbrewedff.com, it will cost you less in March than it does if you sign up in April or May or June, July, or August. In fact, I put the entire schedule right on basementbrewedff.com so you can see exactly what it would cost to join in any of those given months. All right, I think that's it for housekeeping. Let's dive into the good stuff. Russell Wilson has agreed to a 1-year prove-it style contract with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Russ is entering his age 36 season, and quite frankly, there's a lot to prove. The question, at least for fantasy football purposes, is whether or not he will be in an environment where he has a chance to prove that he's still a high-quality NFL quarterback. He is joining the Pittsburgh Steelers, but more importantly, he's joining an Arthur Smith offense, who has 5 full years of experience either as an offensive coordinator or an NFL head coach. He was the offensive coordinator for the Tennessee Titans for 2 years in 2019 and 2020 before getting the head coaching gig with the Atlanta Falcons from 2021 to 2022 and 2023. Now, concerning for Russell Wilson in fantasy football is that Arthur Smith's offenses are notoriously run-heavy. They do not throw the ball very much. In those 5 years where he was an OC or a head coach, Arthur Smith's offenses finished 19th or worse in pass attempts. That includes 25th or worse in 4 of those 5 seasons and 30th or worse in 3 of those 5 seasons. Specifically from a micro-level individual quarterback standpoint, in Arthur Smith's systems during those 5 years, Ryan Tannehill was actually solid. He was very, very efficient as a quarterback for the Tennessee Titans, finishing as the QB 10 in 2019, and then the QB 7 in 2020. But Atlanta Falcons quarterbacks didn't have nearly the same success as Ryan Tannehill did when Arthur Smith became the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, with Matt Ryan finishing as Fantasy's QB 19, Marcus Mariota finishing as QB 20, and Desmond Ridder finishing as QB 22. Now, on the surface, that doesn't sound good, right? It's hard to prove yourself as an NFL quarterback if you're going to be playing in an offense that doesn't throw the football. However, this is a good time to remind you that Russell Wilson spent the majority of his career in Seattle with the Seahawks. He spent 10 years there between 2012 and 2021, and Seattle was never a pass-friendly team in the NFL. In fact, that was a large part of the reason that Russell Wilson found his way out of Seattle to begin with. During that time that Russell Wilson was a Seattle Seahawk, all 10 years, the Seahawks never finished better than 16th in the NFL in pass attempts. They were 23rd or worse in pass attempts in 7 of 10 years. They were 28th or worse in 6 of 10 years, and they were 31st or worse in the NFL in 5 of 10 years that Russell Wilson was there. So they had Russell Wilson playing quarterback, and for half of his tenure in Seattle, Seattle finished 31st or worse in passing attempts. And yet, despite pretty much never throwing the football, Russell Wilson was the QB 9 or better in 8 of 10 seasons. He was the QB 3 or better in 4 of those 8 seasons. And he was the QB number 1 overall back in 2017. The point is, historically speaking, Russell Wilson does not need a ton of volume to pay dividends in the NFL and to pay dividends in fantasy football. Now, there's no denying it. There's no sugarcoating it. The last 2 years in Denver have been a nightmare. 2023 actually was nowhere near as bad as 2022, but there's a reason that Russell Wilson has to sign a 1-year prove-it deal as a 36-year-old quarterback in the NFL, despite the previous decade of success. Now, will he be set up for success in Pittsburgh as the team's new quarterback? We can all but guarantee they're not going to throw the ball very much. Okay, so passing volume is going to be limited. However, Russ will have Deontay Johnson as a volume-based safety blanket like he has been over the last several years. Now, Deontay Johnson's name is starting to come up in trade rumors, but as of right now, as of this recording, Deontay Johnson is on the Steelers, and he should serve as a really nice safety blanket, a volume option for Russell Wilson. Then you got George Pickens, who would, if Russell Wilson still has the accurate deep ball, the accurate arm that we've seen in that previous decade in Seattle, George Pickens is an awesome, perfect fit for Russell Wilson's strengths and his skill set. So there's some high upside opportunity there. You have a little bit of safety in Deontay Johnson. You have some upside and ceiling play with George Pickens as a target. And then Pat Freiermuth you could do worse at tight end than Pat Freiermuth. You got Calvin Austin coming in as the team's new wide receiver 3. Russell Wilson, I am approaching in 2024 as a high-end QB 2 in best ball leagues. Again, stay patient. We'll talk more about that. And in normal style leagues where you have to play where you have to actually choose a quarterback every single week, Russell Wilson should be a very, very nice streaming option more weeks than not. Ultimately, this is an upgrade across the board for anybody who's involved in the Pittsburgh Steelers offense from a fantasy football standpoint. This is good news for Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, Calvin Austin, and it's even good news for Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, the running backs on the team, because theoretically, Pittsburgh should be more effective and more efficient on offense, which leads to more scoring opportunities for the running backs and more clock-killing volume if Pittsburgh can stay in neutral or positive game script. So all in all, this is a positive. This is an improvement for all of the supporting cast around Russell Wilson, and Russ himself, again, high-end QB2 and a strong streamer in 2024. Jerry Jeudy was traded to the Cleveland Browns over the weekend in exchange for a 5th and 6th round draft pick here in 2024, and this one is really, really interesting from a fantasy football standpoint. Jerry Jeudy himself, he's entering his age 24 season. He's the former 15th overall pick from 2020. The Broncos selected him out of Alabama. He had his career best year in 2022 when he finished as fantasy's wide receiver 18, setting career highs in catches, yards, and touchdowns, which is, of course, where we get our fantasy football points from. But in the other 3 years that Jerry Jeudy has been in the NFL, he's finished wide receiver 43 or worse in each of those other 3 seasons. Now, to be fair, he played those all 4 seasons with Drew Lock, Teddy Bridgewater, and a shell of Russell Wilson during those 4 seasons, right? One of those guys is a backup quarterback for the Seahawks. One of those guys is retired, and the other guy isn't even on the Denver Broncos anymore. As we just discussed, he is now on the Pittsburgh Steelers. So is it fair for us to cut Jerry Jeudy some slack and have some optimism for him moving into 2024 playing with Deshaun Watson, who theoretically, if Deshaun Watson can ever return to form, will be easily the best quarterback that Jerry Jeudy has played with? So what does this all mean for 2024 fantasy football? Starting with Jerry Jeudy himself, it's certainly not a bad thing that he goes to the Cleveland Browns, right? He was about to be stuck as the wide receiver 2 on what figures to be one of the worst offenses in the NFL in 2024. And now he moves over to a much more effective, much more efficient offense with Kevin Stefanski, Deshaun Watson, and the Cleveland Browns. Now, the downside of that, of course, is that he's entering a much, much more crowded offense, right? If Nick Chubb is healthy, they're going to feed him. You have Amari Cooper, who's the team's wide receiver 1, and a bona fide wide receiver 1 at that. He's no slouch. He's a legitimate number 1 wide receiver. Cleveland still has Elijah Moore under contract, last year's acquisition. They recently spent 3rd-round picks on David Bell and Cedric Tillman, and then, David Njoku finally broke out in a big way for the Cleveland Browns offense and fantasy football in 2023. So it's a very crowded offense, but still, given the effectiveness, given the efficiency, given the overall upside of the possibility of Jerry Jeudy landing the number 2 wide receiver role in Cleveland, this is at worst a neutral maneuver for Jerry Jeudy. In all likelihood, I'm approaching Jerry Jeudy as if his stock is increasing. I think he's an intriguing buy low candidate in Dynasty Fantasy Football, especially with Amari Cooper entering his age 30 season. It's fair to wonder if Cleveland suspects it's possible that Jerry Jeudy is the team's future wide receiver 1, especially if he balls out here in 2024. Jeudy is in the final year of his rookie contract. He is looking to prove himself and get paid and find a contract somewhere, whether that's Cleveland or somewhere else. So all of the stars are aligning for Jerry Jeudy to at least do better than he's done in previous seasons with the Cleveland Browns. As for Deshaun Watson, there's no way that this is a bad thing for Deshaun Watson. This is a very obvious upgrade. This is a very obvious, strong addition to his arsenal of places he can deposit the football. Okay, so the arrow's pointing up on Deshaun Watson. You got Amari Cooper. This is ultimately a neutral maneuver for the 30-year-old Amari Cooper. He's very clearly the team's wide receiver 1. Sure, you could argue that Jerry Jeudy's going to come in and snatch up a couple targets, but usually when you have a bona fide wide receiver 1 in Amari Cooper with no truly legitimate wide receiver 2, that wide receiver 1's going to get there. So ultimately, I'm not downgrading Amari Cooper very much. If at all, it's a neutral maneuver at worst. Same thing for David Njoku, who finally broke out in a gigantic way in 2023. Very different position, very legitimate target for Deshaun Watson. His fantasy value is largely unchanged with the addition of Jerry Jeudy. But where it gets really, really sticky in fantasy football is there's no way to see the acquisition of Jerry Jeudy as a positive for Elijah Moore, last year's offseason acquisition, and there's definitely no way that this is a good thing for David Bell and Cedric Tillman, third-round picks from 2022 and 2023. Then you got to consider the Denver side of this, right? This is a clear problem for Jarrett Stidham, the projected opening day starter for the Denver Broncos. Of course, it's always possible they get another quarterback, draft another quarterback, but as of right now, as of this recording, Jarrett Stidham looks like he's going to be the QB1, and there's no way this is a good thing. He just lost Jerry Jeudy. Now, what that means for players surrounding Jarrett Stidham is that Cortland Sutton, who was the team's wide receiver 1 last year, stands to benefit from some added targets. But ultimately, the big one here is Marvin Mims, who's still just 21 years old and was the team's second-round draft pick from Oklahoma last year. In fact, he was the first draft pick that Sean Payton used when he was. It was the first Sean Payton draft pick after he was installed as the team's head coach. So there's a possibility of Marvin Mims strapping in on a rocket ship in year 2. Now, of course, we can't expect gigantic fireworks from that offense, but Mims is very much on the fantasy football radar now, where he likely wasn't before with both Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy on the roster. Baker Mayfield staying in Tampa Bay with the Buccaneers after signing a 3-year, $100 million contract, $50 million of which is guaranteed. Not at all surprising considering the guy set career years across the board. He revived his career after looking like he was flaming out in the NFL. He set career highs in attempts, completions, completion percentage. He went over 4,000 passing yards for the first time in his career. He threw 28 touchdown passes, which was the most of his career. And ultimately, he finished as fantasy's QB 10, which is easily the highest he's ever finished in fantasy football. So it's no surprise that he went back to the team that revived his career. However, will that continue moving forward? I have reason to think not. We'll have to see where Baker Mayfield's ADP lands, average draft position. We'll have to see where that lands this summer. But ultimately, I am beginning the 2024 fantasy football draft season approaching Baker as somebody who's on my do not draft list, somebody who is a likely negative regression candidate. Keep in mind that the first 5 years of his career, Baker Mayfield had never finished better than QB 16 in fantasy football, and that was way back in his rookie year back in 2018. He's finished as the QB 16, QB 20, 17, 26, and 29 before suddenly, magically, becoming the QB 10 on a brand new team with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If you tuned into episode 3 of Inside the 20, we did a deep dive. We did a study on Dave Canales, last year's offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We did a deep dive on the resume of Dave Canales, and the TLDR of it is that Canales is a bona fide stud as a coach in the NFL. Everybody he coaches turns to gold. He got career years out of Doug Baldwin when he was the wide receivers coach in Seattle. He got career years out of Russell Wilson, who was the quarterback in Seattle. He revived the career of Geno Smith, and last year, he revived the career of Baker Mayfield. Worth noting, by the way, that Geno Smith finished as the QB 5 in fantasy football under Dave Canales in 2022, but in his first year without Dave Canales in 2023, Geno Smith crashed back to earth, finishing as fantasy's QB 19. Ultimately, Dave Canales moved on. He got a head coaching gig with the Carolina Panthers, and given Baker Mayfield's previous half-decade of struggles, and now having lost the coach that turned him into a top 10 quarterback in 2023, everything about Baker Mayfield in 2024 screams negative regression, and I suspect he will land on my do not draft list. Then you got Mike Evans, who, after toying with the idea of free agency, or maybe just toying with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers front office, decided to stay in Tampa Bay after signing a 2-year, $52 million extension to stay with the Bucs. Not exactly surprising. The guy spent his entire career there, just putting up repeat 1,000-yard seasons. The guy literally has 10 straight seasons over 1,000 receiving yards, which is just fantastic. It's just remarkable. He was the wide receiver 7 in 2023. All of that being said, for reasons that I just mentioned with Baker Mayfield and Dave Canales leaving as the offensive coordinator to become the head coach of the Carolina Panthers, if I have Mike Evans in Dynasty fantasy football, I am trying to cash in on the opportunity to sell low or sell high on Mike Evans in Dynasty Fantasy Football. A lot of people will like what he did last year with the Buccaneers. He had a great season. A lot of people will like that Baker Mayfield is returning to Tampa Bay, expecting that battery to continue. But like I said, I am approaching Baker Mayfield as a negative regression candidate, and that is something that will hurt Mike Evans moving forward. Now, to be clear, Mike Evans has plenty of value as a fantasy football asset. He's still the clear wide receiver 1 in Tampa Bay. But if you have an opportunity to cash in and sell him while his value is high, I'm not hesitating to do that. And if you ever want advice or recommendations or thoughts, if you want some other brains and minds to bounce some of those trade ideas and trade offers off of, then you need to join us in the Basement Brood Fantasy Football Discord channel, where we're constantly helping each other with tough decisions just like this one. Dalton Schultz is staying in Houston after signing a 3-year, $36 million contract extension with the Texans. This is great news for Dalton Schultz. This is great news for C.J. Stroud. The two worked very well together last year in C.J. Stroud's rookie season and Dalton Schultz's first year in Houston. Schultz averaged 11.5 PPR points per game over his last 14 games, and he finished as the tight end number 10 in 2023, and now moving into that second year with C.J. Stroud, where it's fair to expect the offense to get even better. It's not outside of the question for Dalton Schultz to be a top 5 tight end option in 2024 fantasy football. The Washington Commanders decided to move on from Logan Thomas and replace him with 34-year-old Zach Ertz, the former top 5, top 10 tight end from the Philadelphia Eagles. Ertz is going to be reunited with Cliff Kingsbury, who was the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals during 2021 and 2022 when Zach Ertz was traded to the Eagles. And in the 21 games that those two worked together, Ertz was more than relevant in fantasy football. He averaged 7.1 targets per game over those 21 contests and over about 11.6 PPR points per game during that contest. Now, Washington has plenty of question marks, right? They already have Terry McLaurin in place. They have Jahan Dotson. Curtis Samuel might be back. And we have no clue who's going to be playing quarterback. Is it going to be Sam Howell? Is it going to be Drake May? Is it going to be Jaden Daniels? But in fantasy football in 2023, while Zach Ertz isn't somebody that you can afford to spend a draft pick on in regular leagues, there is some very legitimate upside and some very legitimate value to drafting Zach Ertz as a high-end number 3 tight end in best ball leagues. And one last time, if you're not familiar with best ball, hang in there. I promise we're going to get to it. All right, this is where free agency gets really fun and really exciting. And I'm really hoping that news doesn't break between me recording this and it being released tomorrow morning.
Good evening and welcome to Have I Got News For You?
Now, as of right now, the Atlanta Falcons' projected starting quarterback, according to Bet Online, is Kirk Cousins. They are suddenly heavy favorites to land Kirk Cousins through free agency. They're minus 300 to land Captain Kirk. Now, it looks like the Broncos, the Raiders, the Patriots, the Steelers, and obviously the Vikings are all expected to be in the mix for Kirk Cousins' services in 2024. But ultimately, we won't spend too much time here because it's just speculation. But if that happens, my friend, it is wheels up for Drake London. It's wheels up again for Kyle Pitts. It's wheels up for Bijan Robinson, and might be wheels up for Calvin Ridley, who the Falcons are also heavy favorites to land in NFL free agency. Now, interestingly, the Minnesota Vikings, as a direct result or a corresponding bet that I'm seeing on Bet Online, all of a sudden, the Minnesota Vikings are the betting favorites to land Mr. Justin Fields, which would all but lock Caleb Williams into the number 1 spot with the Chicago Bears. But the Vikings are suddenly plus 150 to land Justin Fields ahead of the Falcons at plus 300, the Pittsburgh Steelers at plus 400, and then you have the Raiders and the Broncos who also are expected to be in the mix. But interesting that not only is Kirk Cousins expected to become the quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons, but now you have Justin Fields, who is the betting favorite to land inside the division with the Minnesota Vikings. As for some other big names in fantasy football that are expected to change their uniform here in the coming days, if they haven't already. You have Saquon Barkley, who's plus 200 to go to the Texans, plus 300 to go to the Cowboys, and plus 400 to go to the Eagles. You got Derrick Henry, who's plus 200 to go to the Ravens, plus 500 to go to the Cowboys, and plus 500 to go to the Eagles. You got Josh Jacobs, who's the betting favorite to go to the Chargers at plus 400. Then you got the Ravens at plus 500 and the Texans at plus 600, which would impact Austin Eckler, who is currently favored to go to the Ravens at plus 500, the Eagles at plus 600, or the Bears and Broncos at plus 700, although I literally just received a notification that DeAndre Swift is signing with the Bears, so we can probably go ahead and remove the Bears from consideration for Austin Eckler. Stay tuned for episode 7 of Inside the 20 on Friday, where we'll talk about DeAndre Swift going to the Chicago Bears. You got Tony Pollard. Okay, you don't have Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard is going to the Tennessee Titans. So again, stay tuned for Friday's episode where we'll talk about what that looks like. And last but not least, you have Calvin Ridley, who could be leaving the Jacksonville Jaguars. Currently, the betting favorites are the Atlanta Falcons at plus 200, followed by the Chiefs, Jets, and Bills. You know what? Let's talk about it right now real quick. We're past 20 minutes anyway, so let's talk about it. DeAndre Swift, 3 years, $24.5 million with the Chicago Bears. That includes $15.3 million guaranteed. The amount of money is significant enough to suggest the Bears intend to make him a very centric part of their offense in 2024. The money is something that we can look at as important when trying to project what this offense will look like, because that backfield is already crowded with the last year's rookie Rashawn Johnson. They have Khalil Herbert. They had Deontay Foreman last year. I mean, shoot, looking right now, all three of those guys had over 115 touches. All three of them landed between 115 and 152 touches. So it was a very crowded, three-headed backfield last year. Now, again, the money here suggests DeAndre Swift is going to be a heavier focus on offense than any of those three guys were. What that offense is going to look like, now that's going to be the big question, right? Chicago finished 18th in points and 20th in yards last year. They were a below average offense. Is it going to be Justin Fields at quarterback? Is it going to be Caleb Williams? We just don't know. That's one that we're going to have to stay tuned on. But ultimately, this first initial gut reaction of DeAndre Swift leaving Philadelphia to go to the Bears feels like a very neutral maneuver, leaving a great offense for a worse offense, but perhaps with some more opportunity in the receiving game. At first glance, it's a very neutral maneuver, but again, we're in March, and there's a lot of time before traditional fantasy football draft season, which is why it's a really smart time for you to press pause and click subscribe so that you don't miss as we continue to update the 2024 Basement Brewed Fantasy Football Draft Guide, as we update our rankings, as we update whether or not DeAndre Swift is on our draft or do not draft list. So again, press pause, click that subscribe button, and stay tuned easily. As for gut reaction on Tony Pollard, he signed a 3-year, $24 million contract with the Tennessee Titans, going from one of the best offensive lines in football to, well, not one of the best offensive lines in football with the Tennessee Titans. He's going from one of the best offenses in football to one of the not best offenses in football. Last year's Tennessee Titans finished 27th in scoring and 28th in yards, all behind, Derrick Henry. Now, they did change coaches. They moved to Brian Callahan as the head coach, who was the offensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals over the last several years. So we theoretically should expect an improvement in the offense moving forward in year 2 under Will Levis. But ultimately, when push comes to shove, I don't think there's many people that are betting on Tennessee to be an above-average offense. Tennessee is likely to be, frankly, one of the worst offenses in football. Not to mention, you still have Tyjae Spears in Tennessee, who the Titans used a third-round pick on last year, who flashed very well as a pass catcher and as a receiving option out of the backfield, making it unlikely that Tony Pollard is suddenly this 3-down workhorse in Tennessee. Now, the money that he's getting is, again, kind of like DeAndre Swift. It's significant. Tony Pollard is pretty clearly going to be involved on first down and second down, but receiving opportunities are likely going to be limited with Tyjae Spears in that backfield. Scoring chances are likely to be limited in playing in what projects to be a bad offense. Ultimately, this is not a great landing spot for Tony Pollard. It's not even a good landing spot. I would say that ultimately, when you comes to the fantasy football stock and value of Tony Pollard in 2024, this one takes a hit. Man, there are a lot of moving parts here. As you can tell, literally every single time I look at my phone, there's new news updates. I just found out that Gabe Davis is signing with the Jacksonville Jaguars. We're going to talk about that on Friday. I have to wrap this episode up. I have to get it over to my editor. I can't just sit here and do every single free agent's domino as it breaks. But that is why it makes sense for you to press pause and click that subscribe button on the Basement Brood Fantasy Football YouTube channel, because I am going to be releasing shorts as these fantasy football dominoes continue to drop. And better yet, if you want full access to everything we're doing so you're always in the loop, I am going to be updating my fantasy football draft guide, my rankings, my player write-ups, everything. I'm going to be updating those all throughout the summer, every day, every week, every month, leading up to kickoff in September. So whenever you're ready to join 300 other fantasy football players that are outsmarting their friends and dominating their leagues and winning DFS contests and winning NFL bets in 2024, then you got to get over to basementbroodff.com and join us. And reminder, if you do it in March, you're going to save money. It's going to cost you less than if you sign up in April, in May, in June, July, or August. If you liked this episode, I highly recommend checking out episodes 1 through 5, where we talked about the head coaching and offensive coordinator changes in the NFL, specifically episode 3, where we talked about David Canales, because that one's going to give you some insight on not only the Carolina Panthers, but what it might make sense to expect from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with Canales leaving town to go to Carolina. I'm going to see you on the fantasy football field on Friday morning, where we're going to continue talking about all these fantasy football dominoes that are dropping seemingly every minute, every single time I check my phone. Until then, come hang out with me on Twitter and or TikTok, both of which are at BBFF Mikey, and come hang out with me on LinkedIn at Mikey Henninger, which is actually where I do most of my hanging out online. I will see you on the fantasy football field on Friday. Cheers. This brew's for you.